Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome to the Double Game Week 27 pod of the FPL Wire. I'm your host, Sofa. My co host, Lateriser, and I are joined by our friend, BigManBakar. How's it going, buddy?
Thanks for having me, Zoff. Hello and welcome to all the listeners and viewers. Yeah, seemed like a bit of a group therapy session after what happened in Game Week 26, a week which will stay long in the memory for different reasons. I mean, there were some people who played the wildcard, there were some who didn't. Unfortunately, I was one of those who did, and both of you were as well. So, actually, looking forward to hearing your thoughts as to how you reacted to what unfolded in the week.
Before we talk about FPL, let's talk about football. What a great week of football it was, I think. Don't you agree, Pranit?
It was as dark as the t-shirt I'm wearing. It was just a dark.
But Chelsea won twice in a row.
Yeah, Chelsea won twice in a row. That was literally the only silver lining. Whereas, at least Zoff will admit, Chalo, you were right about Chelsea, maybe getting into a better form, etc. when it comes to the thing. But outside of that, just what a brutal week of football. And you know what? In the last 3 seasons, the most brutal week of football and FPL, where I've fallen drastically, has been when United go to Anfield. I've never owned Mo Salah for any of those weeks in the last 3 seasons. I'm just going to do it for emotional security the next time we go to Anfield. It's just dark. The pain was real. Let's just say that.
It was. But let's just talk about last week a little bit, right? Let's do the group therapy before we dive into the pod, dive into the sponsor plugs and such. What do you think? Do you guys think as such we did something wrong, or what is your perspective on that as such? LR, what you first?
Would I have wildcarded again? probably 10 out of 10 times. If I'm being very honest, maybe 9 out of 10 times is a more correct answer. But given what my team was looking, given what the situation and how the situation played out, I would have wildcarded irrespective. What I would have probably done differently, and that's not to do with the logic behind and the rational behind things, but I do feel like on a very personal level, I've succumbed to FOMO. I don't listen to my instinct as much. I have become very fearful, or more fearful as an FPL manager than I was, and it probably comes from how much we are exposed to in terms of content, Twitter, YouTube, etc. And I am not as confident about backing my own instinct as I was probably earlier. One of the things that I was actually thinking about is would things have been different if I wildcarded not on the back of 2 red arrows? Because if it's a psychology thing, right, where you have 2 green arrows, you're more inclined to back your own instinct compared to not. But that's the only thing that I'm delving from at a personal level in terms of how I would have wildcarded. But would I have wildcarded? Yes. Was there rational to it? Yes.
From Bakar, anything to say?
I think this is one of those decisions where if I sort of went back in time and had to take it again, like Pranal, I would have taken it 10 out of 10 times. I just think that just the sequence of events and how it sort of transpired makes it look worse off, and it just exaggerates the whole thing a bit more. I mean, for example, a lot of us had Nketiah, Mahrez, City defense in our teams, and it made complete sense to sort of make use of the wild card and get rid of the so many fires to put out in our team. And when you look at how things panned out, I mean, no one was expecting a 7-0. Even in the game itself, Liverpool had like an XG of 2.7 and they end up scoring 7 goals. Arsenal had like 31 shots. That's the most any team has recorded this season. Odegaard had 11 shots. Saka came so close to scoring. I mean, and then on top of that, I mean, Brentford, a lot of us were on Pinnock last week. Then a lot of us switched to Henry. Pinnock was the one who ends up balling. So it's just one event after the other, which just makes the decision look worse than it actually was. I think the decision was fine, but it was just that I guess we misread the Man United Liverpool game, which sort of compounded matters and made it look worse. And I mean, truth be told, yes, we've gotten absolutely shafted. It's like 30 to 40 points, which I don't think will be very easy to make up, especially on those people who haven't wildcard. Let's call a spade a spade. I mean, it's good to say things in black and white, because those people who held the wildcard have won fairly and squarely.
I saw you tweet that, and I want to tell you, just as a co-host of your podcast and as a friend, is that's the beauty of FPL. Like, what's done is done. You can't help it. Like, if you keep repeating to yourself that I've lost out on 40 points to those that I haven't wildcarded, that simply has no significance in the decisions that you're going to make from today until the end of the season.
I agree.
Just let go of it. Like what's done is done. Like, I think that's the first thing everybody needs. So, what about you?
So I think we're all human, right? Past experiences do play a factor in how we act now. So last year I did get left behind when I didn't wildcard during this period. And once the results happened in the FA Cup, I sat down with the guys in the Discord for a couple of hours. I discussed everything objectively and went through everything A to Z, step by step. And I'm convinced that if I was in the same position, 10 out of 10 times, I would do it again. The only thing, obviously, now we make predictions. We look at how things will go forward in the future, and you make a prediction. And I predicted the Liverpool game to be something like a 1-1, maybe 2-1 either side, which I thought was reasonable given the form of those two teams. And that's really the only place where we did get quote unquote shafted. Like Henry versus Pinnock is just a variance thing, because if Boomo puts in that chance, it goes the other way around. So I'm not that worried about as such. And also, like with you, LR, I can understand what happened 2-3 seasons ago when you went so much against the grain, even though you may not play a part in your brain consciously. It is in your brain subconsciously to an extent. Even though you might not acknowledge it, it will be there in the back of your mind. So I can understand that as well. But what I do like is I don't mind these things happening, because I like people being rewarded for doing something different. I personally have no regrets about that. Ultimately, if everyone did the same thing and got the same outcome and outcomes were predictable, there would be no point playing this game. So whoever had the courage to go against the grain and hold the wild card, I'm happy they were rewarded.
And I love that. Exactly to that. From a neutral perspective and as a lover of FPL, I love that these events happened over the weekend because it does leave scope for subjective interpretation of what you're watching, what you're analyzing in terms of data, to be open, right? Because you think differently about a certain game and a certain team. I think differently, and that's what we are competing. I'm competing with my views against yours, and that's what makes the game beautiful. If it was so predictable, it wouldn't be so much fun.
Correct.
So I am with you on that.
And
No, I'm all for people getting rewarded for people doing something different. But you know what hurt more was the fact that a lot of people who in game week 25 had set their teams and they forgot to do their teams for game week 26 had Rashford on the bench. They had Salah captain. They had Trent. They had Nunes. I was watching the match with a friend of mine who had the exact same, and you know, I was 40, 50 points ahead of him before the kickoff. And the next thing I know is that he's 20, 25 points better off than me after literally 90 minutes of football. And I didn't even know what happened to me.
Yeah.
Zoff, you want to tell him what?
Kind of things.
It's all these
send me what my.
It's all these Instagram influencers, man. That's who I blame.
Yeah. My brother, Bakar, just while we're on that, my brother sent me a message on Wednesday. After everything broke down and everything happened, he's like, I just opened FPL today. I realized I missed the deadline. So my captain was Salah from the previous week.
Yeah.
I was like, bloody hell. Bloody hell. Real brother. He just sent me that message and I was like, shit, man. And I spent literally 50% of my last week just thinking and debating this wildcard and all of that.
That's it. That's the thing that annoys me, because a lot of us put in a lot of hard work last week, and it's okay if people do something different. And if they chose to hell out, like, well played. But there are a lot of people who didn't even know what was going on and they got rewarded. And the people who were actually putting in the hard yards were the ones who got brutalized.
Yeah. I just want to cite a couple of lessons. And actually, Zoff, this just came to me in my head right now. Is, when you're putting in time and effort into FPL, there is a fair amount of luck involved or whatever there is. But it's still a skill-based game if you ask me. But what Zoff has been saying to me on 6 or 7 separate occasions this season is beyond a point. The incremental value of time spent on this game isn't concurrent with the gains made. And that just sort of comes true or hones in with this sort of thing. And, I've realized a couple of things after this week in terms of, there are a couple of calls where Chelsea, for example, I just didn't back my instinct and went for a Brentford defender when I really just wanted to go for a Chelsea defender. And that's the debate that I was having with myself in terms of, I was so scared of picking a Ben Chilwell instead of Rico because everybody's picking Rico. And I was so afraid, and that just doesn't happen to me. And objectively, when you're looking at this entire situation in hindsight after game week 26 passes, and I'm like Pranal, really? Chelsea versus Brentford. Chelsea, which has Enzo Fernandez, Reece James and Chilwell as wing backs, Kovacic and Enzo as midfielders with Kante as a backup. These are the players you believed in, who think might have a future. Just, is there a point to FPL if you're not going to back your instinct? And I've just realized that the best way to FPL is to back your own instinct, because it is the way of playing this game it's the path of least regret. And I just want to do that constantly. And one thing I'm actually just debating, because I have a very bad habit when the doubles and things come. And I don't know what you guys do, but when the doubles come into the picture and we're looking at Ben Krell's ticker or Lego Mane's ticker, 70 or 80% of the attention goes to only those teams which have those extra games. And I don't think we're giving due consideration to those teams that aren't having those extra games. And objectively, I love that eventually what happened as an outcome and that thing that won was what you see. Your interpretation of the things that happen on the pitch are better than trying to game this game in terms of extra minutes, etc. And maybe the results are not as extreme in football compared to cricket, for example. But I thought of the analogy where we're actually thinking of removing the Virat Kohlis and Babar Azams for the world because they're playing 2 games instead of Sarfaraz Ahmed, who's playing 3 games. You know what I'm saying? Okay, that's the sort of, and here there are not that many runs to score because the goals are not there. But objectively, the Brentford decision, I don't think going with 3 Brighton is wrong at all. But it's a Brentford decision where we need to objectively give a little more consideration to the picks and the teams. And I do get tunneled. It's a very bad habit. And that's the debate that I'm making in my head in terms of, do we get tunneled into just looking at those extra minutes?
I do think it's a difference from last year. Like, sorry, Bakar, I just say, because last year, if you remember, as soon as you activated your wild card, I DM'd you that don't go towards Wolves, pick good players from good teams. And I think both Brighton and Brentford do fit the bill. We have good FPL assets there from good teams. Like, let's say maybe the defender position is probably the one that would be expendable. Raya is a top scoring goalkeeper. Tony scored 15 goals. Brighton are the top XG and XGC team post restart. So I don't think that's a fair apples to apples comparison as such. These are two good teams that were worthy of investment. Bakar, you were saying.
Yeah, I was saying that, I also sort of think that sometimes when sometimes when we load up on double game weekers and they tend to fail, we hear this very often that, we should prioritize good single game weekers. But there are a lot of times when we go for double game weekers and they perform well, and then no one says that, a single game weeker should be looked at. So I just think we shouldn't overanalyze the situation, because I think it is sort of getting to the point where we're getting a bit reactionary and reacting to a game week that's happened, and it's a case of hindsight, in my opinion.
I was thinking about that. Like, am I being reactive when I'm having these thoughts? And where my thoughts were on Monday morning to where they are today also is far apart. Monday morning, the thoughts in my head were far more reactionary compared to today, and that's just human nature. But I was also thinking back mainly about an instant, maybe game week 20 or 21, where I think all of us were aware that Brighton had a blank in 25, and Brighton had a great run of fixtures between 21 to 25. And at that point, we had a decision to make whether we jump on a Mitoma or not. And it's just because this team who has great fixtures, it's like, playing poor teams when you're making comparisons. We're just ignoring it because of one less game. And like, that is the debate I'm having, where I want to start giving a little more weightage, maybe 15-20% more and a little less weightage. Not give doubles their due consideration, but give good teams their due consideration, irrespective of the number of fixtures.
Absolutely fair.
Right.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Before we do, Bakar, let's just check in. Babar Azam for 2 games, Sarfaraz for 3.
Babar for 2 for sure.
There you go.
He lies.
No, I don't rate Sarfaraz at all.
But I know your opinion on Babar, so we'll leave it at that. Let's move on. All data you see on the FPL Wire is taken from the Fantasy Football Scout members area. The new improved members area is now up and running, and the new comparison tool lets you compare key stats for up to 3 players. Player projections are also live, and as always, you can access the custom stats table we create or make one for yourself. Sign up for membership today using our affiliate link in the description below. Right. Where should we start, boys? Let's talk first about the double game week teams. Let's open up with Brentford first. And I think this will tie into sort of our captaincy discussion as we go on. I'll just share some stats from the excellent article up on Scout about more than Brentford. Let's talk about their opponents, right? And I'm going to ignore the minutes per XG over the season. Let's talk about since when both these teams have their new managers. So the minutes per expected goals since Dyche was appointed for Everton is 70.6. That's 8th. Southampton 18th. Now minutes per XGC for Everton is 14th and Southampton 11th. So Southampton have tightened up defensively. So have Everton, but not significantly. But that being said, I think the Arsenal battering has probably affected Everton's numbers. But what I do like that both these fixtures are at home for these teams that are now battling relegation, and Brentford isn't today Arsenal or Man City that's turning up, right? Both these teams will fancy beating Brentford, so I guess they will come out and attack a little bit. What are your thoughts on these two as opponents first, Bakar?
Firstly, I'd like to say that obviously we haven't had enough games under their new managers to draw reasonable conclusions from them. But I would like to think that at least Everton at home would be much better defensively under Dyche. From what I've seen so far, they've looked decent. Again, my thoughts are that Brentford are a good side and they will create chances, and Tony will have, he's the talisman, and his goal involvement of over 50% is as good as it gets, really. So I think Tony is a very safe captaincy shout this week. Brentford, I fancy will score in both fixtures. I don't think both fixtures are relatively straightforward, but I would still sort of back them to score, let's say, 3 goals over 2 games, and you'd back Tony to win ball in those goals.
Pranil, your thoughts?
I don't know what to make of Southampton, if I'm very honest, because I thought they
Yeah.
conceded a fair amount of chances to Leicester as well, especially towards the end. So I just don't know what to make of Southampton. They're a tough read for me, but I think the Everton game, more than any other game, is very game state dependent. If Everton go without conceding a goal for the first 30-40 minutes, I am expecting, and they're very perfectly capable of doing that, because they're good against middling opposition. But if they concede a goal early in the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, we've seen it, that Daesh teams tend to down their tools and they go, their plan B is to attack, which leaves them open at the back, which leaves the game open for Brentford. But if you were to ask me today, I just trust Brighton more from an attacking point of view compared to Brentford. I just don't have that much faith in Brentford to score as many goals, to blow teams off. I just think Brighton are a top 4-5 attack in the league, and I don't view Brentford in the same purview. Talisman, non-talisman, it doesn't matter to me. I just see Brighton are capable of scoring 4-5 goals against any of the two oppositions, and I don't see that with Brentford.
I'd agree with your reading over there. And like you said, it's very game state dependent at Everton, especially. Southampton is the easier fixture on paper. They're very lucky not to concede 3 or 4. I would say with Leicester, those with Iheanacho, Maddison, I think were quite unlucky over there. They've ridden their luck, Southampton. Even against Chelsea, they conceded a fair few chances.
But also, confidence breeds good performances, right? Like, they're on a high right now, coming from 2 good results, and that might just give teams a certain boost mentally. When they start believing in themselves, they start playing better. Mentally, they're thinking that they're doing better, so they're in a good bit of form. I don't think any captaincy option is wrong. I just trust Brighton more.
So now most of us on Wildcard have already made our bed with Brentford assets. Now, if you're not on a Wildcard, which Brentford assets would you bring in, if any? Bakar?
Raya and Tony. Sorry, Tony for sure. If not on a wildcard, yeah. If I wasn't on a wildcard, I'd just prioritize the Brighton mids and Tony. I won't look at either of the defenders actually from Brighton or Brentford.
I don't agree with defenders from Brighton necessarily. I do agree with you, Raya. You probably wouldn't go for, but I would definitely bring in Tony, especially now that he's avoided his yellow card. Now, unless he gets booked in both games, he's going to be available for game week 28 as well. And Leicester away have been the leakiest side in the division. So game week 28 is a great fixture as well for Tony.
Yeah.
So I would definitely look to bring him in, if nobody else at least.
Yeah, and if you're on wildcard, right, and you're looking to pivot that striker position next week to, let's say there are 3 or 4 strikers in the conversation, whether we're talking about Felix or Nacho or Watkins, because of that, and because of you being on wildcard this week, I wouldn't mind a punt on Boomer. He has looked lively. He'd looked lively this week as well. He's looked like scoring every time. I don't mind the idea of a punt there with the idea to pivot next week.
That's fair. We'll talk about wildcards when you should probably wildcard 27, 28, 29 pros and cons a little bit later. But let's drill down to picks from this team. Anything else to add from Brentford? Or let's get down to analyzing the Brighton mids.
Yeah, I think that's it. I still wouldn't mind Raya on a wildcard pick. Raya's just a good keeper.
He's a good keeper.
I'd have him on a wildcard, yeah. I mean, you know what you're getting with Brentford, so I don't think there's much more to say really.
Cool. Right. Now let's talk about Brighton. And before we dive into the stats, I think you can pretty much cliff notes this quite easily. Mitoma has the lowest underlying numbers, but the best conversion numbers. I read he's converted something like 30% of his shots. March has the best underlying numbers in terms of expected goal involvement over a longer period, while McAllister has it over the shorter period, and his returns are position dependent. Now, I had said to both of you guys before going into this game week, we can pick 2 Brighton mids, but if I see that one guy is head and shoulders above the other and I don't have him, I'm prepared to make the sideways move, thinking that this is going to now be up to game week 37. Did either of you guys see that there's one standout guy who you think is the best of the 3? Pranil?
No.
Bakar?
No. It's a 3-sided coin with marginal differences.
Yeah, it's a 33% toss up really. And I mean, when you look at the statistics, March and McAllister, like you've said, Zoff, are the ones who are best. Matoma's numbers actually are the worst of the three, especially since all these three have been playing together and McAllister's been playing number 10. Matoma's had just the one big chance involvement as compared to 6 for March and 7 for McAllister. And this is over the past 3 matches when McAllister's been playing number 10. But it's just that, as you've said, he has been an XG overperformer in the past, and the one good thing about him that March is slightly more prone to getting subbed early, while Mitoma is more like a 90 minutes man. Even in an interview, De Zerbi did say that he's the kind of guy who he'll leave on the pitch for 90 minutes. So he's that expected minutes edge, it does go to Mitoma, and he has been an overperformer. But I don't think there's enough difference in between them to sort of use a transfer to shift between any of them.
Yep. McAllister does stay on
Are you
longer,
feeling a
but
switch?
he does go deeper as soon as the game goes on, because they usually bring on a second striker as such. See, the thing is now with McAllister, I did like what I see in terms of body language, again, the positions he's taking. But if I had seen more from open play, rather than him scoring a penalty and flicking on from a set piece, is something that would have attracted me more. And Achu again did a good post on our Discord where he watched all the Brighton highlights and all that stuff. And he said McAllister is not a natural finisher. The number 10 role doesn't really come natural to him. He's arriving in the box, but the chances he's taking are not like somebody like a Van der Vaart we've seen in the past, who's a very cool, composed finisher in the box. He's snatching at chances a little bit. So I do like McAllister.
In the right positions all the time. Like he's in the center of the box. You know who he reminds me when you're looking at like gameplay, etc. He's just doing the Gundogan role from City well, where he's arriving and timing his runs into the box just perfectly, and he has penalties. So yeah.
Yep. So I do like him. And today, if I was picking, I think I would go Mitoma and McAllister, but I don't think I want to switch out of March. But I think if I was picking today, I'd probably go with McAllister over March. Mitoma would be there regardless. Do you guys agree, or would you still be on the Mitoma March?
So you're still ranking Mitoma ahead of both of them, basically. Yep. So in your opinion, it's Mitoma 1, McAllister 2, March 3.
Because again, stats don't tell us the whole picture, right? We used to see something similar with Hazard in terms of a lot of the times he wouldn't have the direct involvement in the goal. A lot of times he would create, but these sort of players are just talismanic and they're dynamic. They're always looking to create, looking to do something. They're always in the box. So stats don't tell always a full picture.
And they're likely to win you the penalty.
And they're like, as we saw, in fact, you mentioned that, I remember like a last pod or maybe something earlier as well. Yeah. But what is another thing we should mention? But the fullback injuries. Go ahead.
Go on. You're making a good point.
I was just talking about the injury to Lamptey now means that now if what has happened a few times, Gross has played at fullback, either at left or right back when Estupinan has been benched or Veltman has been benched. Now with Lamptey's injury, it's very likely now if they decide to shuffle around, you have Gross thrown back there, which would mean McAllister moving a little bit deeper. So the odds of McAllister's positioning changing have gone up a little bit. And the reasoning why I went for the other two over McAllister is again with a long-term view. Now with the tougher games that are going to come in the 32 double or 31 double, the later doubles that come, they're not against very easy teams. You're going to have City, Newcastle and Man United. Those are not the games I think McAllister is going to be playing that number 10 role. There he'd probably be thrown a little bit deeper. That was my thinking. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things have changed. I noticed in the West Ham game, where Mitoma was playing the wide role earlier and S2 was making the more inside runs. I thought S2 was a little more withdrawn. He wasn't as attacking as in the games previously. So I wonder with De Zerbi, this is just a slight shift in adjustment because maybe Estupiñán is not fully fit, or it's a game-to-game tactic and that might just change based on opposition. Because Mitoma was a lot more inside forward than winger in this game. He was taking up a lot of central positions. So that shift has happened. Now, I don't know how this is going to sustain longevity-wise. But if I'm watching Brighton, I'm with you. If I'm going to pick one of the two of the three, I'd omit March and go with Mitoma and McAllister. But am I still feeling the switch? No. And have I made up my mind in terms of which one I want to go for? No. I do think Mac is getting the higher percentage of the big chances. And that has gone on for the last 6-7 weeks. If he shifts slightly behind in the last 15-20 minutes, it doesn't matter too much because the game's probably done by that time, which is why those subs have come on. And so I can't make up my mind. I do think that he's getting enough volume of chances. I do think he's great at penalties. I do think they have a high chance of winning penalties. And I can't make up my mind between these two. I'm still struggling.
Just a note on the West Ham game, he was getting the better of Ben Johnson a lot on that side. I think it's also very much dependent on the fullback he's up against and how much joy he's getting. He was completely destroying Ben Johnson. So maybe that's why he favored that role. But today, if you're, let's say, not on a wild card, who was the one Brighton mid you would bring in?
Whoever you like more between McAllister and Mitoma. I can't make up my mind.
Bakar, pick one. No sitting on the fence.
Probably McAllister.
Would you captain him?
Probably McAllister.
I do think the upside is in captaining a Brighton player this week. I was going to come to that because, as Pranil touched upon briefly, their attacking numbers post restart have been incredible. I mean, in terms of minutes per XG, they're second only to City. They're averaging over 2 goals a game. It's just that it's very hard to predict who will haul on a particular day because, as we've said, there's nothing between them. And if I sort of knew that there was, let's say if it was a 40-30 split, I would be far more confident captaining a Brighton mid because when you look at their goal involvements this season, Tony's 51%, Mitoma's 29%, March is 26%, and McAllister is 19%. So it's tough to predict who will haul on a particular day. And we've sort of been bitten this week by picking the wrong Brighton mid. So there is a risk that you run of picking the wrong one again, but I'm tempted to actually roll the dice and go with one of my Brighton mids this week.
That's interesting. So I guess
also
go ahead, Pranay.
Just the overperforming and underperforming numbers. Neil did look into the data, and Mitoma has been converting at a very high rate for the last 4 or 5 years, compared to McAllister and March, who are slightly underperforming their XG. So when you are sort of comparing their underlying data, you do need to make the adjustment for the fact that Mitoma is a better finisher. And just another thing in my head. It's just because of the sheer pace that Mitoma has. I think he does have an extra outlet that maybe McAllister and March does have to some extent, but Mitoma has an outlet on the counter. If at all Brighton were countering, Mitoma is capable of beating few players for pace, which I don't have whether that's off the ball or with the ball. And I don't have the same confidence in a McAllister or March to do that. McAllister doesn't create his chances himself. McAllister creates his chances by virtue of placing himself in the right position. I don't know if this has any predictive value in terms of what I'm seeing, but Mitoma is just the kind of guy who will create his chance and score that goal anyway. I'm struggling. I wish I didn't go March, and I'd just be happier living with these two.
Yeah, a few other factors that I'd like to point out as well is that, firstly, that I say that they have a higher ceiling because you've also got to factor in the additional point for a clean sheet and goal. And Palace are second bottom for big chances since the restart. Leeds have scored 2 times in 7 or 8 games. There is that high chance for clean sheet in both fixtures. And when you look at the odds, Brighton against both the teams they are facing and Brentford against both the teams they are facing, Brighton's odds of scoring 2 or more goals are actually far higher, almost double than that of Brentford. So it is that sort of a move which is worth taking if you're chasing, but that's the risk that comes with it, that it's not predictable. So you'll have to get lucky to get it right. There's no 2 ways about it. You'll have to be lucky to get to
But
get
also,
it right.
I think if you hit it, you're not lucky. You
put
yourself in it.
I mean, you'd still be lucky to get to sort of captain the right Brighton mid. I mean, if you captain the one who gets, let's say, the biggest haul, then you have to be lucky, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it's short term.
One thing on March I'd like to mention is that both Palace and Leeds have conceded the highest number of chances down their left flank this season, which could work in his favor this week.
Yeah. You know what Jazzy did? Brilliant play. So he was also on Wildcard. I've been chatting with him. He has so much faith in Brighton. He played both his Brighton mids and benched Kane this week. He was just sure that Wolves are going to see Kane out, and he got Kane for the NFO fixture. Shout out to that. I thought that was brilliant play based on what you're predicting out of the game.
Yeah, he's an excellent manager. I chat him almost every week.
Yeah.
But this is the thing with Brighton, that their chance creation numbers are so elite that they can just blitz every team any week if they don't do a Brighton.
Yeah.
I was trying to counter the debate when you said that 51% chance involvement for Tony versus 30%. And I was actually looking, I went to the Fantasy Football Squad members area right now to see the number of goals that they've scored since restart. And I was like, if it's 30% or 20 versus 50% of 10, does it really matter? But it does matter because since restart, Brighton has scored 16 goals and Brentford has scored 14. So it's not like there's a wide difference. So that might come into play for somebody who wants to play like the safer bet.
I'll just read out some quick stats for those guys on the audio can't see it. This is for the last 6 matches. Brighton are top of the league for XG non-penalty. That's 14.21. 24 big chances in 6 matches. Brentford are only 7.47. Now, the two opponents for Palace and Southampton are right at the bottom, 19th and 20th. Oh, sorry, the different Palace is for Brighton, Southampton is for Brentford. We're talking about Leeds is right. I think Leeds are actually a more defensive side now under Gracia. So some reorientation there. They aren't really a free-flowing attacking outfit. They're a lot more pragmatic. And Palace also right down there. So like you said, Bakar, very good potential for a Brighton clean sheet, which is why I sort of didn't agree with you in the previous section. I do like Estupiñán as a pick, really, and he has the upside this week as well. Outside shout for captaincy? I would...
My point was that, it's if for someone without a wild card, I would rather prioritize the Brighton mids and Tony over him. That was my point. It's off on the other.
But Bakar, if you're on wildcard, which 3 Brighton would you pick? I want to ask you
that. Interesting. I would probably go with Estupiñán, March, and McAllister.
Yeah,
I think so. Or the three Brighton mids. Yeah.
3 Brighton mids, I don't know. I wouldn't go with the 3 Brighton mids because ultimately you get Rashford in there and then there's so many other good mids to pick for. I wouldn't go with 3 Brighton because Estupiñán is a great pick. That's the point I'm trying to make. Estupiñán is just a fantastic pick who could outscore all the Brighton mids over the next 2 games.
Question, boys. What do you do if you're a Sanchez owner?
You move. Because if you've got Sanchez, you've obviously got him with a plan for keeping him for the next 4 or 5 doubles that Brighton have.
You move him to steal or you move him elsewhere? Bakar?
I think if you don't have Raya or Pope or De Gea, I'd probably move elsewhere because the thing with Brighton is they have a lot of fixtures coming up. Yes, the shirt is steals for the time being, but De Zerbi did say that, if Robert plays well again, I won't be sort of hesitant to give him another chance. So it's sort of playing on my mind. I mean, I think Steele is safe for the next, let's say, 4 to 5 weeks, but one bad performance, you never know.
He played well.
I know he played well. They kept a clean sheet. So, I mean, there's no reason to drop him. But I mean, just because you want this player for the long run, that's the risk you run. But again, the good thing about him is that he's cheap. So, I mean, if you're planning on bench boosting this week, then I think Steele is an excellent buy because I just can't see Sanchez coming back in this week. But for the long term, I'd be more hesitant.
If you've already used your wildcard, I'd move elsewhere and get a 3rd Brighton player. Only because of one reason and one reason alone. I just don't know what De Zerbi is like. I don't know if this is a tough lesson and, the first choice keeper is going to come back in a week or 2. Or I don't know if he's going to play the player on merit. I just don't know much about De Zerbi to predict that. So that's why I'd go with the safer route and move elsewhere. Because I don't know what De Zerbi is thinking.
You think it might be tough love?
Yeah, I don't know, right? It's lack of knowledge about the guy. And I feel like, you can go to a defender or another mid, make that switch. So that then you're sitting peacefully for the rest of the season. Because again, if you've already used your wild card, this is a pick I essentially want to make until 35 or 36, right? Because Brighton have doubles in the future also. So just correct the mistake, make your bet right now because we don't know what De Zerbi is going to be like in the future.
Fair shot.
Another thing that I'd like to mention here is that it was interesting to see that Brighton created 3.7 XG against West Ham. I mean, West Ham, we've been sort of checking their defensive underlying statistics time and again this season. They're not actually bad. They're just outside the top 5 when it comes to underlying statistics. So this shows you how potent attack Brighton are, that they just created so many chances against them. So, I mean, this is my counter to Zoff's points regarding Leeds that they have been defensive of late. I mean, Brighton have just torn apart.
I agree.
West
completely.
Ham. So,
I completely agree. Brighton
I won't be surprised to see. Yeah, I won't be surprised to see Brighton score 2 or 3 against Leeds. I think that's very likely.
I'd predict that.
Yeah.
I think they're just a consistent 2 XG team.
Absolutely.
Great.
Just some quick defensive numbers. Brighton, top of the league again in terms of XG conceded, 4.98. Brentford, not far. Brentford in 5th, and that's why I said, like, ultimately, I don't think going with one of their defenders over, say, a Chilwell, who we didn't know would be playing wing back or not, was a bad idea, keeping this in mind.
Some of us shared articles that this is the conversation happening before the game week started.
So these are the opinions, not conversations.
Yes,
These are the
but-
opinions.
Yes.
Big
yes,
difference. So
Yeah.
those are the numbers as such, and let's just quickly dive into the captaincy right now. Who do you guys have it on?
Whoever I get in out of Mitoma and McAllister will be my captain.
Oh, so you're definitely going Brighton.
Yep.
Bakar?
Only one thing that might not make me go Brighton is the weather in Leeds on Saturday.
Yep. The good thing is it's a Saturday
that's-
deadline. We will get some sort of
Yeah.
indication. So I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah.
Bakar?
I think I'm likely going to go with the Brighton mid. I have March and Matoma, so I won't be swapping around to McAllister.
Yep. I'm firmly on Tony.
So,
Firmly on Tony.
okay.
I
Reason?
don't think- Just because I don't want to make the choice between the two Brighton mids, which one I want to pick. And ultimately, I quite
It's a
fancy
horrible
Tony.
decision to make.
Fancy Tony in terms Tony is nailed for 180 minutes. There's no yellow card rubbish to worry about on penalties in general. Looks good numbers, good team. That's it.
Cool.
Let's
Anybody, if you were on Wildcard, would you entertain the thought of Evan Ferguson?
Though the thing is, Brighton, I've noticed from the way they play, the strikers aren't necessarily the ones getting a big volume of the chances. They bring the midfielders and wingers into play. So I personally wouldn't go there. There are much better forward picks out there.
Agreed. Besides, he's a threat from Welbeck for reduced minutes, right? Welbeck can always come on early at, like, let's say 65, 70 minutes. So you'd want the Brighton attacker to play 90 minutes, and the Brighton mids are the guys for that.
Absolutely. Let's look at some matchups which you had mentioned earlier, Bakar, regarding the players on that side let's look at Brighton first. And like you were absolutely spot on over there. All the chances are obviously on March's side, both for Palace and Leeds. So that's another feather you could add while keeping March. And ultimately, what I've seen about March, you're having this debate also in the Discord, is that people say he's not been historically great. He has had some double-digit haul recently. And what I look at De Zerbi, I see a coach, not just a manager. We see a lot of players improve. They have breakout seasons. And I can see that now with March in terms of his body language. So the argument that he's historically an XG underperformer as such doesn't sit well with me, because players go through these purple patches where they do well. I wouldn't read into that.
XG aside, he's third for big chances created after Trippier and Bruno since the restart. So he's creating plenty of big chances as well. It's just the fact that they're just not being converted as many as he's creating. So that's another factor. I mean, it's just one of those things which is, I think he's a wall. There's a haul in him waiting to happen. I'm not that worried about him personally.
And they have happened. I think I was reading some 4 double-digit hauls in the last 9 or something like that.
There was one against Liverpool, I remember.
What's funny is Liverpool have kept 6 clean sheets since then. When we just go back to the numbers we saw earlier, they were still bottom in terms of XG conceded. So it's just anomalies all over the place.
But question, Liverpool have been on an upward trajectory. It's a good point because I do want to talk about Liverpool and United, Question for number one is, do we have Liverpool back?
Yes. I think to an extent, especially now with the Madrid tie gone and now with Spurs faltering the way they are, the way they whimpered out in the Champions League, I think they can smell blood. The 4th spot is very much there for the taking. The Nunes, Gakpo, Salah combination is clicking. I think Liverpool is somebody now that earlier I had mentioned that the 29 double isn't great. But now if I was wildcarding in 29, I'd probably look to include Darwin.
If you're wildcarding now or something, would you throw in a Liverpool player this week, maybe free hit next week, and then get back on a Liverpool players until the end of the season?
I mean, we'll get to the wildcard discussion. I don't think this is a good week to wildcard per se. I like much more next week or the week after, because all the existing players in your squad probably already have great matchups anyway.
Correct. But Liverpool would be in your consideration if you did it.
Very much so.
Very much so. Bakar, you agree with Zof's sentiment?
I think if I was on a wild card this week, I'd consider Salah only, because when you look at Liverpool's fixtures after the restart, they're not good for clean sheets. So Trent would be nowhere near my consideration. And the problem with Nunes is that he might have his minutes eaten into with Diaz back. Gakpo back, Jota back. So I won't go there. Besides, I still think that
I don't share that sentiment. I think Nunes
I
is
think
too important for their front three for his expected minutes to be a threat. If anybody, I see Gakpo getting rotated if they're out of the UCL and have to win every game to chase that fourth spot. I don't see them clicking without Darwin. He's the one causing chaos. I think I wouldn't be worried too much. I don't share the same sentiment.
Would you pick him over someone like Kane? Because it's basically Kane or Tony, right?
Yes.
If you're picking one right now, it's not that straightforward.
I'm really not upbeat about Spurs after yesterday and Conte's comments talking about like Spurs heritage and all that stuff. Conte is basically turning up to training in an Arsenal jersey and asking to be sacked. That's pretty much where he's at now.
I know, but you've got to play the fixtures, right? Forest at home, Spurs away. Good as
we made our bed with it, but I would not be buying Kane today.
Yeah.
Not even before Forest at home and Southampton away?
I would buy Darwin instead for Bournemouth. It's a better
Bournemouth.
fixture.
Yeah, that's one fixture though. Then he blanks.
It's just a functional team versus a non-functional team. That's why I'm feeling bad about that Kane result, because I wasn't looking at Kane just ever. Because let's face it, Spurs haven't been functional for a long time. Kane's just Kane. He's a great player, so getting half a chance is good enough for him. And outside of that, he's just the king of dark arts, where somehow he managed to find himself unmarked on the back post where he's able to tap the ball in. But Spurs aren't functional, haven't been for a significant amount of time now. I don't see them blowing teams off 3-0, 4-0. Liverpool, with how they're playing and their upward trajectory, yes, I do.
Absolutely spot on. Completely agree with everything you said. Let's just do some quick matchups also for Tony.
Before that, because there's a lot of people own United, and I'm actually curious because I'm reflected, and I think it just deserves a little conversation. What do you think happened with United? Was it a bad game? Was it very optimistic coaching? What do you think happens? Zoff, I'll come to you first.
I do think there's accumulation of minutes and fatigue did get to them after a certain point. After 1-0 at halftime, it was a competitive game. United were very much in it, then 2-0, 3-0, and I'm going to sound a little bit like Gary Neville over here. The goals were a little bit fortuitous. In terms of the angles, you see Gakpo's goal was from acute angles. Firmino's one also was the one that you expect De Gea to save. Salah's, both his goals were a bit of pinball in the box, which came from poor clearances. So there was a lot of happenstance happen, and Liverpool obviously played well. They were much better than United, but they were not 7 goals better than Man United, in my opinion.
Do you think we'll bounce back?
Very much so.
Sure.
This is not like a Brentford result as such. And a lot has been made about Bruno Fernandes throwing his arms up in the air and all that stuff. That will be corrected going forward.
So, speaking of wildcards, I think if I was wildcarding right now, I might pick Bruno Fernandes because the fixture this week against Southampton, despite the blank next week, they have a double again in 29, and a very good double. And after that, Everton and Forest in 30-31. So, someone's on wildcard, I would probably pick Bruno despite the blank in 28.
But then you would just pick Salah instead.
But the thing with Salah is that you'll probably have to sell him to afford Haaland in game week 30 later. So with Fernandes, you can sort of afford to fit Haaland in. That's the big point.
Again, we were just talking about it, Bakar. We don't know what the scenario will be like 2-3 years. Ultimately, go for the better pick today. And Salah is obviously a different level from Bruno.
Yes, but there's a difference between picking a Brighton mid or a Brentford striker over Salah as compared to Bruno Fernandes.
I guess if funds you bring into it, it becomes a different argument altogether. But in isolation, there's no comparison, right?
Of course.
Another team we should talk about is Chelsea. Upward trajectory. Where are you with them? I saw on the Discord you were looking at Chilwell as an asset. Any other options that stand out? Where are you with them?
Let's talk about Chelsea a little bit. Now, the 2 results have been good and the performances have been better, but let's not get carried away. Leeds are, again, ultimately not a very good team. Dortmund are, in fact, flying very high in Germany. So beating Dortmund was a big result and we completely outplayed them. It wasn't a
deservedly
good result.
Yeah.
So in that sense, so what has happened is this team knows how to play a back 3. This team is just generally, right from the time under Conte, this team functions much better under a 3 now. And what I do like is Chilwell's position is far more advanced than James. He's getting a lot more touches in the penalty box. He's playing almost like a left center forward. And the way that Kai drops deep, that benefits him on that side with Cucurella playing left center back. He gets forward, he takes those set pieces. While James, he was at the end of some very bad tackles from Bellingham. in that game against Dortmund. I do think he's a bit of a risk in terms of minutes because we don't know our Champions League draw yet. Whoever we get now is going to be a good team. Either side of that Champions League game, you could expect Reece to get a rest, but I think Chilwell now looks head and shoulders above. I might skip Shaw and stick with Chilwell. Like I was planning to get Shaw in 29, but Chilwell has a double-digit haul now in him.
I agree. It's like prime Chilwell of old. He just knows where to be. He's got that sense of the goal, So good pick.
And if they show good signs again, because against Leeds, he was top for penalty area touches and 37 final third touches for Chilwell. If they show good signs again this week, we can potentially even buy him next week at home to Everton. That's a really good fixture, in fact.
That's what I was telling in the Discord. I was looking to buy him instead of Henry that week because I don't like Brentford's 29 double as much for clean sheets. And the 28 fixture is absolutely prime. His captaincy potential close to that in 28. It screams double-digit haul there.
For another question,
only takes a week. Only takes a week for Zoff to cheer up regarding Chelsea.
Yeah, man. I need something. Some ankle. I need to see some ankle. And that's in the wing backs, man. I love me a wing back.
I just wanted your personal opinion. Are Felix, Kai, and Sterling first choice?
Felix. Let's correct ourselves since he himself has been candidate. So ultimately, I think Felix and Kai, I don't look at them. You know who I like above both of them? I like Sterling. Because Sterling, I think out of all the three, I would still go for Sterling because he had some very good chances in that game again, but he's just marginally offside. And he's always the guy playing on the last man, the guy who's looking to break with those two guys so creative. He's always going to be the guy on the end of things, I think. So if you're looking for the attacker, I think Sterling's your man. I don't see Mudryk getting that position anytime soon.
Feels so nice to just hear good things from you.
About Chelsea, right?
I'm telling you, in a dark week of football, this is the only ray of light I've had. It's a small victory and I'll just take it.
It's good. It's good to be looking forward to watching Chelsea again. It's definitely
well done on calling it right, by the way. Well done on calling it right for now.
It's not a call. It's just banter amongst friends at the moment right now. Nothing else.
Cool. Right. Just quickly look at the matchups now for Brentford and Southampton. Ultimately, again, not many more chances from central areas. So not really much you can glean from that. I'm just looking quickly at Arsenal, boys, because a lot of us are going to be benching an Arsenal mid in terms of chances. Fulham concede a lot of chances down the center. I don't think Martinelli playing down the center is necessarily better, though, for his prospects from what I can tell. Anything on Arsenal you guys want to add?
Not particularly in Arsenal, but let's talk about bench boosting in 27 as opposed to bench boosting in 29 because quite a few people have questions on that.
Yep, and let's just skip to the wildcard discussion right away. And now we are going to discuss now if you still have your wildcard, when is the best week? And I think we can all agree that this week to me doesn't feel right because you already have perfectly good players. Now, but the trick now is I've made 2 drafts, which I'll just quickly go through you guys for 28 and 29. But what is going to happen in 29? If you do wildcard, you're going to leave very good players on your bench. I've got Kane here, but ultimately you stick Haaland in there. You're going to leave Haaland, Saka, maybe a Newcastle defender on the bench. So it is going to be problematic. As said, that is the main trade-off I see. So if you can bench boost this week, I don't mind it. Get it out of the way. And wildcard in 29, because I did the quick comparison. I do like a 29 wildcard more than 28. Where are you guys on this?
If you're somebody who doesn't own maybe 3 Brighton mids or something of that, in that team-specific nature, you may be wildcard this week. Because again, our perception has changed. If we are looking to sell Liverpool players, we might not sell. And just looking at Liverpool's fixtures now, United's fixtures now, and knowing that you're probably going to hold them, and if you slightly ignore 32, I do even not mind the option of wildcarding now, free hitting in 28, and then bench boosting in 29. I think it sort of plays into itself. There's a strategy there, which is sort of aggressive.
That's interesting because I've had free hit 32 penciled in my mind primarily because of the whole Brighton, United, and Chelsea thing. Bakar, where are you at? If someone's still holding their wildcard, when do you think is the best week to use it?
Again, it depends on the team. If someone has Trent, Salah, Nunes, I won't recommend wildcarding this week because, as you've said, I would just use maybe 2 or 3 transfers to bring in the Brighton mids and Tony and just roll along with it because the teams, if with Liverpool, the team is well set. I don't see much upside to it. I think, again, it makes much more sense to wildcard in 28 or 29. But Pranil, I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts about free hitting in 28, because, again, it's based on the premise of, I guess you can load up on players who are playing next week. But don't you think 28 is likely to be low scoring anyway? So wildcarding later makes more sense.
If it's low scoring and if you want to balance the players and maybe play just 8 or 9, but like if I was wildcarding now, because of the fixtures that United and Liverpool have this week, and they're probably going to be in our thinking 29 onwards, then you see how you fill the gaps in the middle, whether you go lighter or heavier on Arsenal, and based on that you decide when to free hit. But that was just a thought in my head. I haven't looked at it closely enough because I've already used my wildcard. But I see value in 20. If you have a couple of Brighton mids and a few Liverpool players, you don't obviously wildcard this week, do it a little later. But outside of that, 28, 29 options.
Yeah, but just one of those things that when I was looking at a potential wildcard 27 draft, the one thing I noticed was that I wasn't going to pick more than one Arsenal, and I think the same would apply to Gameweek 29 as well, because their fixtures after that turn and they don't have a double in 29. But if you were, let's say, wildcarding in 28, then you'd obviously have more Arsenal because Arsenal playing in 28, so the whole dynamic changes.
Exactly. So I'll just read out quickly the audio, the draft I've made for these guys, just to give you guys some structure. You would go with this is a 28 wildcard. You'd go with the double Newcastle, Chilwell, Mings, Estupiñán. I've got triple Arsenal mids over here with Mitoma, Rashford, Tony, Watkins, Kane. The idea here, you would be moving off two of the Arsenal guys to maybe a Brighton mid and Bruno in 29. That would be the idea, and you could still bench boost. But if you go now directly in 29, you will obviously not be able to bench boost that week. You would be leaving Haaland, Saka, and a good defender on the bench. But you can obviously go a bit more aggressive. You can bring in your Darwin, maybe bring in Ings, things like that.
Yeah.
So I still like the idea of wildcarding this week because A, it allows you to set yourself up for 28 without using the free hit. B, it allows you to bench boost in 29. Again, it sort of, you can keep Salah. I mean, you can keep Salah in your team. It's not as if you necessarily have to sell the Liverpool guys on a wildcard this week. And at the same time, you can load up on the Brighton and Brentford assets. So I'm not as opposed to a wildcard this week as you are.
I just think my approach to wildcard would probably change a little. I want to add that. I wouldn't see in terms of where I want to save my free hit, where I want to use my bench boost. I think that I would zoom out from there a little and I would zoom into which are the teams that I'm liking for the end of the season. Where do these teams have good fixtures? And based on that, I'd wildcard. Like I'd let that dictate because my perception has changed in terms of you're trying to game the game in terms of fitting the pieces for the fixtures. Put that aside. Just think about the teams you like. Where do they have good fixtures? Where you can take advantage of the situation and hit the wildcard there.
Yeah, in that case, it's 29.
I mean, I'm okay with anything. It depends on you subjectively, which teams you like and where do they have those good fixtures. That's all.
We'll look into it more next week, but I'm just saying if you're planning to wildcard in 29, do have a look at if you can bench boost this week. That's probably the only takeaway I would give you guys in the short term.
Okay.
Cool. Let's just discuss our teams real quick. And
before we move into our teams, very happy that 750 people are joining us this week. Thank you guys again for joining us after such a brutal week. We've loved the support that you guys have given last week as well. Make sure you're hitting the like and subscribe button if we want to be involved in the conversation with us. Join us on Discord by becoming a member on either YouTube or Patreon. The community is growing out there and it's great. So thank you. We appreciate your support. Go on, Sof.
Bakar, you were saying
one last thing was I was saying that there's one last thing to discuss for those who wildcarded like us in Gameweek 26. A lot of people are torn between deciding between bench boost this week and in 29. Do you want to sort of run through the pros and cons of either?
I think the 29 one has a much higher ceiling. That's it.
Fair enough. Pranil?
Yeah, and it's a big ceiling because of that reason where you're wildcarding just before the big week. With high potential. That's the only thing.
No, he's talking about the guys who already wildcarded in 26 versus last week, whether you bench boost this week or in 29. That's what he's asking.
29.
29, right? It just feels like higher ceiling there. It's the IB thing. The IB is probably the only caveat you throw in there in terms of injuries, but then you just take a hit or so, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the counter argument to this is that, in 27, you can sort of you can sort of bench boost early, and then you can focus your transfers on the first 11. And you have to remember that 29 is after an IB, which is still 3 weeks away. I think it's game week 29 is starting on the 1st of April or 2nd of April, something like that. And then again, as we've spoken earlier, Brentford, again, they have bad fixtures in 29, which isn't ideal. But having said that, I still prefer bench boosting in 29 because, yes, Brentford have a tough fixture in 29, but I mean, I would still sort of think that they can come close to matching the likes of Kepa away to Leicester this week. I would expect Leicester to score with Maddison or even Fulham to score this week. They're decent at home.
Take hits and get rid of your Brentford assets for better assets, because there are better assets, and you're making those transfers until the end of the season.
Yeah, that's also a good counterpoint. Yeah, actually. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like if you get injuries, if you get screwed, like I think 29, based on how you are deciding where you want to free hit, is a good opportunity to take a -8, -12, get in those long-term picks, whether they're Chelsea assets, Liverpool assets, United assets. Because again, you're going to hold them until the end of the season. Correct whatever mistakes you made on a short-sighted wildcard, take the minus on a chin and use the bench boost there.
Spot on. Cool. Let's discuss our teams. And Bakar, I say our teams because we obviously have the same 15. So I'll just read that out again. Rhea, Trippier, Henry, Estupinan, Rashford, Saka, Mitoma, March, Kane, Haaland, Tony, and Kepa, Odegaard, Botman, and Zinchenko on the bench. Rolling transfer, Bakar?
Yes, of course.
Same here. I'm very likely going to do the Henry to Chilwell move next week. So this week I would like to roll. Captaincy, we've already discussed, so no point repeating that again. Pranal, your team is also fairly similar. I think you've got Martinelli there instead of Odegaard.
Yeah, I have 2 Arsenal mids and only 2 Brighton players. So I need to make the tough decision of selling one of Saka or Martinelli for a Brighton mid, which I'm going to pour myself a drink on tomorrow and decide which of Saka or Martinelli I want to let go.
Cool. Let's wrap up, guys. We can't really do a Q&A today. I have somewhere I need to be. Any last words, boys?
Yes, I do want to address, because I'll keep it short off 1 minute, because Gabe is asking, why does 29 have a higher ceiling? I think it depends on the makeup of your team. Like in my team right now, I have Kepa and Maddison sitting on my bench who play each other, and they have better double game week fixtures in 29. So it's very team specific in terms of higher upside. We might buy a fixture or 2 more, and we might get a couple of assets more on hits who are playing 2 games which are good games. So that's why we think maybe it has a higher ceiling. That's about.
I mean, a lot of us have Newcastle defenders. They have a double in 29. Similarly, I'd assume a lot of us will bench Saka or Kane in 29. Saka has Leeds at home, Kane has Everton. You would assume they're better fixtures than, let's say, Odegaard this week. So it's quantity and to an extent quality as well. It's hard to say, but I think there's I won't call it upside, but I just think 29 is marginally better.
Yep. Again, team dependent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
That's it. Thank you so much for being with us today. Enjoy your meals off, and I'll see you boys next week. Any last words, boys?
I think, guys, see you next week.
Good luck.
Play it your way.
Good luck getting the Brighton midfield ruler right.